Good morning. So just to summarize, this fall we're looking at worldviews and the Christian worldview, meaning the Christian way of thinking about things, and what kind of competing worldviews can have a non-Christian influence upon us and how we can avoid that. Last week we looked at something that was called moral therapeutic deism, which was based on a study of what do young people in America believe, a very lengthy study, and they saw a pattern of what American teens who call themselves Christians believe. And we looked at these 5 elements last week and talked about them from a biblical perspective. And in particular, we said basically number 1 is fine. There's a God who's the creator. Number 2, the main problem we had with it is the only behavior element in American teens' worldview was basically be nice. Anything else about Christian behavior was not really on the radar. The central goal of life is to be happy and feel good about oneself. We said, well, biblically, the goal is presented as serve God, obey his commandments. Happy will come as a byproduct. If you're living the right way, you're living according to God's will, happy is a byproduct. But in modern thought, happy is the goal that you consciously shoot for. And number 4, in particular, was very troublesome. American teens, by and large, seem to believe that you don't really get all that involved with God, but if you have an emergency, something bad happens in life, then we go to God. And it's not just teens, it's adults too. If you look at how we live in America, it's adults too. And adults also quite often believe number 5, good people go to heaven when they die, which kind of leaves out the cross of Christ. It leaves out Christ taking our punishment for him. Just be nice, be good, treat people well, you'll go to heaven. In which case, you could be completely not a Christian. That would apply to an atheist or to a Hindu or to anybody. So we critique those ideas with biblical responses. And we showed where they were problematic. And this week I just want to give a sampling of some of the things that the teenagers said when they were interviewed about their beliefs. When they were asked, summarize, what do you believe? Just you put it in your own words, and so on. Someone summarized her entire belief as be kind as a Christian. Another said, God's watching over us, that's it. That's the sum total of this person's belief, who calls himself or herself a Christian. I really don't have any beliefs, but basically just do whatever. I just pay my dues of going to church every Sunday and vacation Bible school things, just that. I believe there's life after death, but that's about it. Now you might think, well, teens are not very articulate, you know. I mean, you can't take that too seriously, right? I remember when I first came here and I called back to a youth minister in Dallas at my old congregation to talk about teaching teens. And we had a long conversation, and one of the incidents he mentioned was he had a father call him up irate. You're not teaching the teenagers anything. you're the youth minister and they don't know anything. How did he know that they don't know anything and that he's not teaching anything? Well, after church, he asked his teenage son, what did you all learn today? And he said, nothing. And he took that literally. I guess he didn't know teenagers any better than to take that literally. And he called up the youth minister. You're not teaching them anything. You don't know anything, And the youth minister had to explain that, it's kind of like when a teenager comes home from school and you say, what happened today at school? Nothing. What did you learn? Nothing. Don't take that too seriously. But the thing is, these teens were actually articulate about other things. When you asked them about things that had been drilled into them at school, like drug abuse education or sex education, they knew and they could talk and they had all kinds of things to say. Which kind of makes you wonder, what about their churches? What's going on in their church that they can't say anything about their faith, but they can say things about drug abuse education or sex education? What kind of job are their churches doing of teaching them the Word and teaching them their faith and how to think about their faith, how to apply their faith? Now, once again, this is not Church of Christ in particular or Rugby Avenue. This was all kinds of teens across the country who identify as Christian, who claim for themselves the title of Christian. And I do think that things are much better among our teens. But as I said last week, all three elders here are very aware of the issues. We don't think that we're immune to the influences of the world. And so we have ways of addressing this. How important is religion? Well, a lot of teens said a religion is important to their lives. That's good news. But when you ask them, for example, they can't really come up with anything. And when the interviewer talks to them for a long time, what becomes obvious is, well, religion is an important part of their lives on Sunday, for example, when they go to church. They can't say why it's important at other times. So that's what they meant by religion is important. They meant I go to church every Sunday and it's important to me then. But how is it important in the rest of your life? They couldn't really come up with anything to say about that. One of the things that comes across very strongly among teens is moral relativism. Everything's individualistic. There's no absolute truth, and that's something they apply not just to religion, but to anything else. The quotes from the teens that are very typical, who am I to judge? If that's what they choose, whatever. Every person decides for himself. If it works for them, fine. Are these attitudes limited to teens, or do you hear adults in America? Where do you think teens are getting this? They're not inventing all that themselves. This is our culture in America. They're getting this from adults. They're getting this from outside influences. They're not original thinkers on that subject. They're not inventing this. Funny thing is, people who always say, well, who am I to judge, actually do judge quite a few things. Obviously, you shouldn't hurt someone else. It's totally wrong to have sex with someone you don't care about. Well, that sounds judgmental, I guess, if we're being non-judgmental. Apparently, they've been educated in certain things, and they're willing to judge about those things. They're willing to draw a line and say there's right and there's wrong. But then when it gets to other things, whatever works for you, whatever makes you happy, whatever you think. But another piece of good news is there is a subset of teens in America who are very serious about their faith and their morality, and they're not relativists. When the teens were interviewed, what about people who don't believe what you believe? We get quotes that indicate something other than relativism. Other religions don't worship the one true God. Jesus died for you on the cross. I mean, that's a matter of life and death. If you're practicing another religion, it's pretty pointless. It doesn't matter what religion you're believing if you don't believe in Jesus and the cross. If you're not believing in the truth, what does it amount to when you die if it's not the truth? The Bible is the truth. These teens are in the minority. Probably adults in America who would say these things would be in the minority in America today. But yes, there are teens who are strong in their faith. There are teens who believe these things and are willing to say these things. Finally, we have some more good and bad news about their relationship with their parents. Teens are actually very heavily influenced by their parents' beliefs, their parents' religious practices. They're not looking to rebel. They're not looking to get to a different church than the one that they've been raised in. They often refer to their parents when they're asked about how they came to believe what they believe. They're close to their parents. They look up to their parents as examples. And that's good news. There's some bad news. When they're interviewed, a lot of teens who call themselves Christians and say they come from a Christian family say they really don't hear much about the Christian faith at home. And when they said it was important on Sunday, a lot of them admitted it didn't seem to be all that important at home in their families. Think about what that says to us as parents, grandparents, and so on. They're open to hearing about the faith, but they're not hearing it. You know, they hear it on Sunday, that's it. That's not something that anybody ever talks about on a Thursday, you know. So what message does that send, or what attitude are they going to have for the rest of their lives about the Christian faith and about church and so on? It's a little compartment of your life. Right? On Sunday, this is important. On Monday, we've forgotten about it. That's the way their parents are. That's the way they are. Many of the parents who were interviewed separately and who have been studied in other studies talk about religion in very earthly terms. They don't talk about how this is the truth and this is of eternal life and death importance. A lot of adults in America talk about religion like, well, it would help the kids, keep the kids behaving if you take them to church. You know, maybe they won't get in trouble. Won't get in trouble with drugs or the law or whatever if I take them to church. It's a very pragmatic attitude that American adults have about religion. The adults, the parents, don't speak of religion as this is the truth and it's of utmost importance for your eternal life. American adults speak of religion as, yeah, that's probably good for the kids. Not a ringing endorsement that this is God's truth, but more, maybe this will keep them behaving. And what was really kind of amazing to me, because certain things you would think kind of happen without people being conscious of them. But there were a number of teens who actually articulated church and Christianity and so on are not that really important to me right now. But I think someday, like maybe when I'm older and have kids, it will be. That's really kind of interesting to me that someone's kind of, not just kind of unconsciously going through phases of life, but premeditating. I'm going to not really take it seriously now, and then later I think I probably will. That's a really odd thing to me. But they're very conscious of that. They're conscious of, in some other phase in life, this might become important to me. Now, there's a little bit of good news that they can return to the faith at a later age. But where do they get this attitude? Where do they get the attitude that religion is of less usefulness, but then at a certain phase in life it becomes more useful? What makes them think that way? Well, look at the previous bullet. They pick it up from their parents. Their parents think that now that I've had kids, church is useful. And the kids are picking up that attitude, which means that since they're not parents yet, church isn't really that important. Maybe someday it will be. So there's a lot here for us to think about in what we communicate to our children and our grandchildren. Is all of this important for every day of your life? Or is it important on Sunday and in certain phases of your life? Like when you're raising kids, church becomes important again. Then before that, forget it. After that, you could probably forget it. Kids are picking up on these attitudes. And it weakens their faith. Instead of having a daily Christian walk with God, they have this kind of loose attachment to God. And so we have to kind of look in the mirror. This is talking about what teens believe is not an exercise in, boy, kids these days, I get so tired of hearing that attitude from older people. If kids these days are a certain way, whose responsibility is that? I mean, there's a lot of this talk these days about, this generation, there's the greatest generation and the silent generation and the baby boomer generation and Gen X and millennials and Gen Z and all this. And there's all this stereotyping and whatever. And even when it comes to trivial things, I always think, well, who's responsible? I saw an article that said, boy, Gen Z, those who are college age, they can't do anything in the kitchen. They don't know how to prepare a meal. And I thought, well, whose responsibility is that? I mean, who didn't teach them? Every time somebody wants to talk in some negative term about one of those generations, I think, well, who raised them? So talking about what teens are thinking is not pointing a finger at teens and saying, boy, they're deficient in some way. What influences did we expose them to? Did we consciously think about faith? Did we demonstrate to them that faith is important every day? Did we demonstrate to them that you could actually be in your house and the day of the week is not Sunday and you could actually be talking in the family about faith? Or not? So, but this last part that really, really hit me, for someone who's 15 years old to be premeditating, I'm going to coast for a while. I'm not really going to pay much attention to this, but then later I'm planning on taking it seriously. That's disturbing to me. And I think that we have to look in the mirror. What have we communicated to younger generations about the importance of the faith? Have we only communicated you should go to church on Sunday? because that's not really a walk with God. Thoughts? Yeah, yeah. Why can't my kids be, I think my dad had that realization in life, why aren't his sons as handy and self-reliant and so on as he was? Well, when I look back at my dad's life, and I mentioned this in his eulogy when we had a family service, when my dad was in high school, his favorite exercise was pull-ups. And he went to his dad and said, I'd like to get a pull-up bar in the backyard. And his dad said, great, why don't you build one? So he had to think about it. And he had to draw out, okay, I'm going to need posts, and then I'm going to have to stabilize the post. They need to be this tall. And he went out and got wood, and he made it. And he realized at some point, he mentioned to me when I was a teen, why aren't my sons this way? Well, because I didn't raise them that way, exactly. We weren't as handy as he was because he didn't say to us, okay, good, go do it yourself.
There were times when I wonder about this congregation if we're really a church or if we're just a social organization.
Why?
Well, we should have a lot of respect, especially for God, when we come together here. And in the Old Testament, they said sometimes your meetings do more harm than good. When we come in here, I don't think we should bring drinks in here. People should be dressed not to cause lust, any kind of lust or anything like that. That's just my opinion.
Yeah.
And I learned too late that you have to teach your own children at home because the church is not going to do it.
Well, I think that we've talked about, those of us who teach kids and teach teens have talked about the fact that we get kids in class for how many minutes a week?
I remember teaching, and the material we used was just awful.
Mm.
Yeah, it's awful. Don't start it.
Well, I credit this church because I was raised Episcopalian, so
Yeah.
I kind of have the opposite view. My kids know more about Scripture since I came to this church
Yeah.
than I ever did. And so it takes a village, and y'all are a part of the village that help my kids to be the people that they're becoming.
Well, that's good, and we're trying, and as I said, I'm going to teach the 5th and 6th grade class in the winter about the subject of how do Christians think and what kind of things are infiltrating Christian thinking that are not Christian, and we're going to be explicit about it so that they think about these issues.
So you need to feed them spiritual meat, not milk.
Yeah. I know that in my upbringing, I was raised in the Methodist church until about age 10. And about at that point, even to me, it occurred to me, my so-called Sunday school class had some stories about behavior, but they didn't even talk about God or the Bible. The behavior ideas might have had some Christian origin at some point, but it wasn't explicit. And it occurred to me that I was getting tired of that. And my maternal grandparents, who were the Methodist influence in the family, came to a realization at about the same time up in Oklahoma. And they literally started to go church to church, visiting and seeing what these different churches were about. And they went to the Presbyterian church and the Baptist church and the whatever. And that's how they found the Church of Christ. And the sermon was about the Bible. And the sermons that they were getting at the time at their home church were about, should President Nixon be impeached? And should we support school busing for the purpose of racial integration, which was a hot topic in the early 70s, and so on. And they would sit through a whole sermon with no mention of God or Bible or anything, and eventually they'd had enough, and that's how they ended up moving. And then they told me about the Church of Christ and said, if you've stopped going to the Methodist church and your parents have stopped going, they looked up, there was a Church of Christ a couple of miles away from your house. And sometimes my parents would take me, and sometimes I would go there on my bicycle myself. And so it's kind of like my dad being told, you want it, go build it yourself. I had to go do it myself. And so it stuck with me. And the worry that we always have is, it's one thing to be part of that first generation that comes to the faith, but then you worry, when I raise my kids in the faith, are they going to have the attitude of basically, yeah, my parents dragged me to church, so, it's not as personal to them, right? How do you pass it down? There's a saying among Jews, a true Jew is the one who has Jewish grandchildren. Meaning not only did he know how to raise his children in the faith, but he knew how to raise them so that they could pass on the faith. And at that point, it might never stop, right? It might go generation to generation forever. And that's what we have to be concerned with. You've got faith. How can you pass it on? How can you challenge children and grandchildren to walk with God on a daily basis, not just to keep God at arm's length, which is what we're seeing from so many teens today. They believe that God exists and he's the creator, but he's kind of at arm's length in their lives. We can't point the finger at them, it's up to us to do better than that. So, thank you.